From New York, this is Democracy Now!
They sent mercenaries to kill the president at his home with members of his family because of roads, water, electricity, and the referendum, as well as the elections at the end of the year so that there is no transition in the country.
The widow of Haitian President Jovenel Moïse speaks out after he was assassinated last week. She was shot recuperating in a Miami hospital. Haitian police say they've arrested Haitian-born doctor based in Florida who came to Haiti with Army security guards and political objectives. We'll go to Haiti to speak with Magali Kamo-Denis, a former minister of culture in Haiti, who's now the coordinator of the civil society commission to find a Haitian solution to the ongoing political crisis. Then lawmakers return to Washington, D.C. after a 2-week recess, where they'll push forward on a bipartisan infrastructure plan and budget resolution that could address climate change, education, and poverty.
All told, families will receive a credit of about $3,000 to $3,600 per child. These payments represent the largest anti-poverty program in a generation, and the child tax credit has the potential to cut child poverty in half.
We'll speak with New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez about the infrastructure bill, the Green New Deal, New York City's mayoral election, the assassination of the Haitian president, and more. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. More arrests have been made in connection with last week's assassination of Haitian President Jovenel Moïse. Christian Emmanuel Sanon is accused of working with the masterminds who plotted the killing after flying into Haiti on a private jet. He's believed to be a Haitian-born, Florida-based doctor. Police say he planned to assume the presidency and use the men involved in the killing as part of his security team. Haiti's police chief said his forces are working with Colombian officials. So far, 26 Colombians, including former soldiers, are suspected of being involved in the assassination. 18 of them have been arrested, along with 3 Haitians. The arrested men were reportedly recruited by a Miami-area security firm called CTU Security. 5 suspects remain at large. 2 Haitian Americans who were arrested last week claim to have been acting as interpreters. The U.S. said it's sending senior FBI and DHS officials to Port-au-Prince, but has so far denied requests to send troops to Haiti, though says it will increase U.S. military aid there. Meanwhile, unrest is growing in Haiti amidst the political turmoil and the worsening economic crisis.
Politicians are fighting amongst themselves. Each one is claiming power. Since 1804, the country has a leadership problem. The leaders never think of the people. They always use the people to defend their own interests.
Haiti is also struggling to contain the coronavirus pandemic as the country has yet to see a single vaccine. We'll go to Haiti for the latest after headlines. COVID-19 cases rose in 42 U.S. states over the past week as the vaccination rate has slowed down and the more transmissible Delta variant spreads. Over 99% of U.S. COVID deaths in June were among unvaccinated people. The Centers for Disease Control issued new guidelines urging schools to fully reopen in the fall, but leaving major decisions in the hands of local officials. The CDC said fully vaccinated students can mostly forego mask wearing, even when inside, but that 3 feet of distance between children should be maintained if possible, and 6 feet between adults or between adults and students. In New York City, officials were forced to halt the transfer of unhoused people from empty hotel rooms to congregate shelters after the Legal Aid Society filed a motion saying it was a violation of people with disabilities and certain health conditions. In Cuba, thousands took to the streets of Havana and other cities in rare anti-government protests denouncing the island's economic crisis during the COVID-19 pandemic. Cuba is facing its harshest phase of the pandemic with skyrocketing infections. The island set a new record Sunday with over 6,900 positive cases. People are scrambling to cope amid shortages of medicine, food, and other resources due to catastrophic U.S. sanctions. No vaccines. Thousands of others led counter-protests Sunday in support of the Cuban Revolution. And President Miguel Diaz-Canel, who accused the U.S. of instigating anti-government protests on the island and urged the Biden administration to lift the blockade. The top U.S. military general in Afghanistan is stepping down today in a symbolic end to the nearly two-decade occupation. Army General Austin Scott Miller has overseen the U.S. war in Afghanistan since 2018. Last week, President Biden said the U.S. military will complete its withdrawal by August 31st, though it's leaving hundreds of soldiers there. This comes as Taliban fighters have stepped up their offensive, seizing more territory and surrounding major cities. This is a resident of the northern city of Kunduz.
The fighting is ongoing in Kunduz. The situation is worrying, and many people have been displaced from their homes. When will this situation end? Our demand from the central government is to make this clear whether they should hand over the city to the Taliban or take full control by themselves and clear the whole area from insurgents so that we can live a peaceful life.
Ethiopia's National Electoral Board says incumbent Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has won a second five-year term in office. His party's landslide victory came after fewer than 40 million people in a nation of 110 million registered to cast ballots, with no voting at all taking place in 3 of Ethiopia's 10 regions. That includes the Tigray region, home to 6 million people. 400,000 people in Tigray are in famine, with nearly 2 million more on the brink after Prime Minister Abiy pursued a devastating military offensive against the separatists. In sports news, England's Football Association is condemning racist attacks on social media aimed at black players on the national team following their loss to Italy in the Euro 2020 final Sunday. England lost to Italy 3-2 during penalty kicks. The English team responded on Twitter, quote, "We're disgusted that some of our squad, who have given everything for the shirt this summer, have been subjected to discriminatory abuse online. We stand with our players," they said. In Venice, Italy, officials at the G20 summit have backed a proposal calling for a global minimum tax for at least 15% in an effort to curb tax havens and loopholes for major corporations. The proposal faces many potential obstacles, including objections from businesses and low-tax countries. It also currently excludes financial services firms and extractive industries. Protesters gathered in Venice called out the exclusive gathering of the world's 20 largest economies.
This is an economic model that we want to oppose. It is the same economic model that today at the G20 they will try to propose again, to get the lost economy back on its feet after the COVID-19 crisis. This model of tourism, capitalism, and exploitation is not a sustainable model to recover from the economic crisis.
President Biden issued a wide-ranging executive order Friday to curb anti-competitive practices, which he said stifle economic growth and lock workers into low-wage jobs.
What we've seen over the past few decades is less competition and more concentration that holds our economy back. We see it in big agriculture, in big tech, in big pharma. The list goes on. Rather than competing for consumers, they are consuming their competitors. Rather than competing for workers, they're finding ways to gain the upper hand on labor.
Included in the executive order are provisions calling on federal agencies to more thoroughly scrutinize mergers, support for states and tribal governments that import cheaper prescription drugs from Canada, and for the Federal Communications Commission to restore net neutrality for broadband. President Biden fired the head of Social Security, Andrew Saul, a Trump appointee and prominent Republican donor, after he refused a request to resign. President Biden has named a replacement to serve as acting Social Security commissioner until a new permanent leader can be confirmed, but Saul insists he'll continue in the role. He's pushed anti-union and anti-benefits policies at the Social Security Administration. Bill Pascrell Jr., chair of the House Ways and Means Subcommittee on Oversight, said Saul's agenda was, quote, to impose cruelty on seniors and the disabled. In immigration news, government data obtained by the ACLU has revealed the Trump administration began separating asylum-seeking families at the U.S.-Mexico border as early as May 2017, nearly a year before Trump's zero-tolerance policy officially went into effect. From July to December 2017, some 234 families were separated in Yuma, Arizona, according to government documents, though the overall numbers are likely higher. Many children remain separated from their parents 4 years later, while some parents are missing after having been deported. Some of the families originally came from Guatemala, Belize, Nicaragua, Angola, and Russia. In Texas, an African-American man who waited over 6 hours to cast a vote in March of 2020 faces up to 40 years in prison for, quote, illegal voting. 62-year-old Ervis Earl Rogers was arrested Wednesday and charged with violating a Texas law barring people with felony convictions from casting ballots. He remained in jail for 3 days until the nonprofit group The Bail Project paid his $100,000 bail. Republican Attorney General Ken Paxton ordered Rogers' arrest just before the start of a special legislative session in Texas in which Republicans are pressing new voter suppression laws and trying to make it more difficult for people arrested to post cash bail. On Tuesday, President Biden is set to deliver a major voting rights speech in Philadelphia. The city of Charlottesville took down 3 racist statues over the weekend, including 2 of Confederate generals Robert E. Lee and Thomas Stonewall Jackson. Lee's statue was at the center of the deadly white supremacist Unite the Right rally in 2017. Charlottesville Mayor Nakuya Walker spoke just ahead of its removal.
Taking down this statue is one small step closer to the goal of helping Charlottesville, Virginia, and America grapple with its sin of being willing to destroy Black people for economic gains.
Charlottesville, Virginia also removed a statue of 19th century explorers Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, who were involved in establishing settler colonialist rule over indigenous people. They're depicted with Shoshone interpreter Sacagawea kneeling by their side in a submissive posture. Meanwhile, the University of Virginia Sunday took down its statue of Revolutionary War military leader George Rogers Clark, who's depicted attacking a Native American family. The death toll in Florida's Surfside condo collapse reached 90 people. 71 bodies have been identified, including 3 children. Recovery work is expected to last at least another 2 weeks. British billionaire Richard Branson rocketed to 53 miles above the Earth on Sunday in a test flight of his privately funded Virgin Galactic spaceplane. Branson's trip above the atmosphere came just days before the world's richest person, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, is set to fly to the edge of space aboard his self-funded New Shepard rocket. This month, Bezos stepped down as Amazon's CEO, in part to focus on his rocket company, Blue Origin, as it struggles to compete with billionaire Elon Musk's privately held SpaceX corporation. In response, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders told the New York Times and Maureen Dowd, "You have the richest guys in the world who are not particularly worried about Earth anymore. They're off in outer space," Senator Sanders said. In western Arizona, 2 firefighters were killed Saturday when their plane crashed as they surveyed the Cedar Basin fire. It's one of thousands of wildfires burning on over 300,000 acres in 6 western states. California's largest wildfire exploded in size to nearly 84,000 acres Sunday, fueled by a withering drought and scorching hot temperatures. The Beckworth complex fire has spread into neighboring Nevada and is only 8% contained. So far this year, California has seen 115 square miles consumed by wildfires, more than double what had burned at this point in 2020's record-setting climate-fueled fire season. The fires came as record heat returned to part of the western United States over the weekend, again fueled by the climate crisis. Las Vegas tied an all-time record high of 117 degrees Fahrenheit. Palm Springs, California, hit a record 120 degrees, and the overnight low in Phoenix on Friday was 93 degrees Fahrenheit. Maricopa County officials have logged over 100 suspected heat-related deaths so far this year. Death Valley hit 130 degrees Fahrenheit on Sunday for just the 5th time ever, tied for the highest temperature ever reliably recorded on Earth. And in the Arctic Circle, the town of Banak in northern Norway reached 94 degrees Fahrenheit last week, hotter than the highest temperature recorded in Miami, Florida this year. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. When we come back, we go to the capital of Haiti to speak with Magali Komodeni, a former Minister of Culture who's now coordinator of the Commission to Find a Haitian Solution to the ongoing political crisis. Then we'll be joined by New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Stay with us. By Kati Dada. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York City, joined by Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
We begin today's show in Haiti, where police said Sunday they arrested a key figure in last Wednesday's assassination of President Jovenel Moïse at his home in Port-au-Prince. Haiti's national police chief, Léon Charles, said they arrested 63-year-old Dr. Christian Emmanuel Sanon, a Haitian-born doctor based in Florida, and that he arrived in Haiti last month with, quote, political objectives. Police said Sanon is one of 3 Haitian Americans now arrested in the attack, along with 18 Colombians. 5 Colombians are still at large, and 3 were reportedly killed. The Miami Herald reports the detained Colombians said they were hired to work in Haiti by the Miami-based company CTU Security, which is run by a Venezuelan man named Antonio Emmanuel Antriago Valera, who is anti-President Maduro, the president of Venezuela. This is the sister of a Colombian former soldier accused of participating in Moïse's assassination, who was killed during a gun battle with Haitian police. Jenny Capador said her brother had been hired as a bodyguard.
There is something that doesn't add up. Something is wrong. Something happened. What I do know, and what I will assure the world of, is that my brother was a correct person, and my brother did not do what they are accusing him of. In the last conversation I had with my brother, he told me, "We got here too late. Unfortunately, the person we are going to guard, we couldn't do anything."
On Saturday, one of Haiti's top gang leaders, Jimmy Cherizier, a former police officer known as Barbecue, said his men would take to the streets to protest the assassination.
Many people from the opposition and stinking bourgeoisie joined together to betray the president. It is a national and international conspiracy against the Haitian people. I ask all groups, gangs, to mobilize, take to the streets. We demand explanations about the assassination of the president. We had a problem with the president, but we have never said that foreigners can enter our territory to kill the president.
This comes as Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby told Fox News Sunday the United States sent an interagency team from the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI to, quote, see what we can do to help in the investigative process. The U.S. said they are also upping military aid to Haiti, and the interim government has called for both UN and U.S. troops to come into Haiti. For more, we go to Haiti's capital, Port-au-Prince, to speak with Magali Camo-Denis, a former Minister of Culture in Haiti. She's the coordinator of the civil society commissioned to find a Haitian solution to the ongoing political crisis. Welcome to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us. Can you tell us what you understand at this point took place over this past week, this historic, unprecedented assassination of the president, what you know so far? Magali Camo-Denis, are you able to hear me?
Yes, now, yes.
Excellent. Can you talk about what you understand has happened since this unprecedented assassination of the president of Haiti? Who is involved, who's been arrested, and who you think is behind this historic attack?
First of all, let me say that we are very, very, very sorry for what happened to the president. This is not what the population was asking for. We are very shocked. That makes 3-4 years that we are asking him to go to leave the power, and he didn't, but this is certainly not what we wanted. Who did it? There are so many scenarios. I don't think that this is what it is important now for us. We want justice. We want the investigators to identify the authors of that crime and to punish them according to the law. Exactly the same way as we ask justice for Marie-Antoinette Duclerc, my young friend, political comrade, who had been assassinated 5 days before the assassination of the president. All those anonymous victims in the capital, hundreds of victims, people being killed, kidnapped. We are asking justice for them. Let the justice do its job. What is important, really important now, is that we are in a catastrophic situation, and we have to do all we can do to stabilize the situation and help people live. So the investigators will be able to answer those questions better than I can do. Those questions will have answer on proper time.
Could you talk about this whole issue of where were the president's guards There was no shooting between the assassins and the supposed guards of the president at the time. Has anyone been able to figure out or question his own security?
I'll give you the same answer. The investigators will answer that. I wasn't in the house. I don't know. I can't answer you seriously. Where were the guards? You see, since 3-4 years, there was a reign of crime in the country. And the international trivialization of the crime and of the life. And this is in that atmosphere that made possible that kind of crime, to assassinate a president in his room. So that assassination is related to all of the assassinations that we had in the country during those 2-3 years. Remember that the chief of the Port-au-Prince Bar Association have been killed in his house, very, very close to the president's house. So this is not it is very, very a special situation because it is a president, but it is not isolated. This is a reign of crime. That regime of PHTK installed the reign of crime. And now the president have been victim of his own reign. So we are sorry for that, but that's not, let's the investigators do their job again.
And I wanted to ask you also, what's your response to the interim Prime Minister, Claude Joseph, asking the United States and the UN to send troops and security into the country?
It's only for him, because he knows that he took the power without any mandate, without any agreement. So that's why he needs the protection of the military. But there is no situation who could explain an intervention of the US. We don't want that. We already had that. And we know what that left for us. We don't want the boots. We already have the boots on our knees now, on our neck. That's not physically, but we cannot breathe now in Haiti. We don't want them to come. We welcome the International Commission of Investigation, including the FBI, but we really don't want that. And what we have to recognize, if the maturity of the population, this population had been in the street almost each day during that last years. And when that happened, there was no manifestation of joy. There was no riot. There was no people in the street burning, etc., etc. The population is very calm, very, very calm, and doesn't want to give any pretext to that government to ask for any intervention. That is for its own interest, for its personal protection. That is asking for that.
Magali Kamodini, who do you believe right now is in charge of Haiti? And according to the New York Times, Haiti's interim Prime Minister, Claude Joseph, says he's taken command of the police and the army, declaring a state of siege that essentially puts the country under martial law. But constitutional experts questioned his right to impose it, and his claim to power was quickly challenged by a rival, Dr. Henry, who was named to be the next prime minister under Moïse, but not sworn sworn in. You have the president of the Supreme Court who just died of COVID, who constitutionally would have been next in succession. What do you think, what entity should be in charge of Haiti right now? And your concerns about the calls for U.S. and UN troops?
None of them, Ariel or Henri, is legitimate to be on power. There is no provision in the Constitution for that situation. We are in an extra-constitutional situation. We have to look for a solution of exception. I'm here working for the commission that have been created by the civil society, a commission to find a Haitian solution to the crisis. We knew we were in a crisis, and that makes 4 months that we are working with all the political groups, all the civil society groups, from the peasants to the union, from the human rights organization, feminist organization, the diaspora, etc., to create a broad consensus between all the sectors of the population to propose a Haitian solution. There is no other legal answer to that situation of exception.
Going back to President Moïse, could you talk about his role in the Petrocaribe scandal, where billions of dollars from Venezuela, what marked for Haiti, disappeared?
That's what the population was asking for. Where is the money from the Petrocaribe? Where are the jobs? Where are the hospitals that was supposed to be created with that money? And the answer of the government was killing people, was gas tearing during the march. And beside that, all the gangs that he has armed, all the gangs that he had federated, where can be able to protest with the protection of the police. This is a vast system of corruption that have been reinforced. I don't say that they create the corruption in the state, but we have reached a level of corruption that we never knew before. So this is what has to be done. Investigation for all the kind of crime, the financial crimes also.
And can you talk about Pierre-Reginald Boulos, one of the Haitian oligarchs? I believe now there has been an arrest warrant issued for him. This was before, under Moïse, which could have extremely, to say the least, angered him. But being in Washington, hiring lobbyists, what his role in Haiti is right now, and then what you believe the U.S. should do.
The role of Reginald Boulos is one of the candidates, as many other candidates. He has a special position because he comes from the private sector, and he was one of the main support of the President Jovenel. He helped him to reach the power. But I have no special. For now, he's a candidate like the other one. I don't think that he deserves any special attention because there are 10, 20. But what the U.S. can do, for once, we are asking them to listen to us. We are in a process, meetings every day this week. We are in a process. to have a large consensus between all the sectors of the population. For once, please, I'm asking them to listen to our voice. They always say that the problem have to be solved by the Haitian. We would like them to respect their words and in fact, let the Haitian solve their problems and bring their solidarity to that solution that we are creating now. There
are elections scheduled to be held. Are there elections scheduled to be held in September? Or do you believe that they should go forward?
Listen, since 3 years, there was one speech. People are killed, election. People are being kidnapped, election. The day before the assassination, election of the president, election. The day after the assassination of the president, election. As if nothing had happened. It's an insult to our intelligence. They cannot keep doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. That's Einstein's definition of insanity. We have to reset. We have the car is broken. All the tires are flat, and you still want to go to the beach. Let's repair it. Let's talk. Listen to us. We know what to do. And we know also what not to do. The body, the bullet-riddled body, corpse of the president was barely cold that the State Department was still insisting to have election in 2 months. We know that all the political crises during those 20 or 30 years came from bad election. We don't want a cheap democracy. We were shocked when there was that violent riot on the symbolic and democratic institution of the United States, the parliament. We were shocked. As you people in the America were shocked. We know we want election, but we want an election that is not only transparent, but one that favors the participation of the election. Since the international community took charge of the election in Haiti, we went from 75% of participation of the population to today to less than 15%. That's the result of the organization the election by the international community. We are asking them for humility, for modesty, to recognize their part of responsibility in that failures, and come and talk to us.
Magali Kamo-Denise, I want to thank you so much for being with us, former Minister of Culture in Haiti, speaking to us from Port-au-Prince, now coordinator of the Civil Society Commission to find a Haitian solution to the ongoing political crisis. This after last week's unprecedented assassination of the President of Haiti. When we come back, we speak with New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez about Haiti, about the infrastructure deal, about the Green New Deal, about New York City's mayoral election. Eric Adams will be meeting with President Biden today. Stay with us.
Tell me a tale that always was. Sing me a song that I'll always hear. Tell me a story that I can read. Tell me a story story that I believe. Paint me a picture that I can see. Give me a touch that I can feel.
Tell Me a Tale by Michael Kiwanuka. This is Democracy Now!, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. As we've reported, Haitian police said Sunday they arrested a key figure in Wednesday's assassination of Haitian President Jovenel Moïse at his home in Port-au-Prince. Haiti's national police chief said they arrested Dr. Christian Emmanuel Sanon, Haitian-born Florida doctor, that he arrived in Haiti last month with, quote, political objectives. Police said Sanon is one of 3 Haitian Americans now arrested in the attack, along with 18 Colombians. The Miami Herald reports the Colombians said they were hired by Miami-based company CTU Security, which is run by a Venezuelan man named Antonio Emmanuel Entriago, who is known to be anti-President Maduro of Venezuela. Haiti's interim government says it has asked the United Nations and the United States to send troops to help secure key infrastructure. The U.S. has so far declined, but has sent an interagency team from the Department of Homeland Security, as well as the FBI. Colombia has sent their head of military intelligence because the massive number of those involved, it is believed, with the assassination team are former Colombian military or Colombian. For more, we are joined by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the U.S. representative for New York's 14th Congressional District. She represents over 650,000 people across parts of Bronx and Queens, one of the most diverse districts in the United States. We want to talk about the mayoral election here in New York. We want to talk about infrastructure and the Green New Deal, Congressmember Ocasio-Cortez. But this latest news in Haiti and the call for U.S. or UN troops from some sectors, the interim government of Haiti. What is your concern here with President Biden pulling the troops out of Afghanistan and the possibility of pressure to go back to the U.S. going back to occupying Haiti?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there are an enormous amount of concerns. I, first of all, applaud the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan, but this is, the intention of that is to not relocate troops from Afghanistan to anywhere else. And I don't believe that that was the intention in withdrawal from the White House either. But this situation is extraordinarily delicate and extremely fragile. And I do not believe right now that the introduction of U.S. troops particularly without any sort of plan, sets any community, whether it's the U.S. or whether it is Haitians, up for success. I do believe that with the assassination, the people of Haiti and the country is in a very delicate moment, and our role should be in supporting a peaceful transition and a peaceful democratic process for selecting a new leader and avoiding any sort of violence, but particularly in really carrying supporting any due process for justice here in the United States for any actors that may have been complicit on U.S. soil.
Representative Ocasio-Cortez, I wanted to ask you something closer to home, the mayoral race in New York City, the mayoral primary. Eric Adams has won that primary. He defeated a candidate that you were backing, Maya Wiley. I wanted to ask what your sense is of what the message of the Democratic voters were or was in this election.
Yeah, I think anyone who's here in New York City knows that this race, this race was not, I don't believe it was a primarily ideological race. This was our first ranked choice election for mayor in the city's history. And I believe the race had a lot of different complicated dynamics. First and foremost, I think we had COVID recovery front and center. So, I believe that Mayor Adams, or, presumptive, who may be presumptive mayor, Eric Adams, he ran a strong logistical operation. He ran a strong on-the-ground operation. And, I do not believe that this is some large bellwether for the country or for Democratic voters in the country. I think it was very just indicative of a pretty wild race. And anyone who is following this race knows and can see the dynamics that were happening throughout, with candidates really cycling through, surging at one moment and not at others.
So, and your hopes for recovery for New York City, because amazingly, because of COVID, many of these local governments and state governments now have more money as a result of federal assistance than they've ever had before. What are your hopes of the rebound of New York City?
Well, I think the thing that we really need to focus on is an equitable recovery and a just recovery. And what's really important to note is that even prior to COVID, the city was on a very dangerous precipice. Real estate prices and prices of housing were going through the roof. Rents were going through the roof, and small businesses were already starting to be driven out of business and having mass closures because of the skyrocketing costs of real estate, housing, and rent on small businesses. And so my hope is that this recovery is just, and that it centers working people, and it centers a recovery that also approaches, frankly, public safety from an evidence-based approach, which we know is centered in anti-violence and community-based programming.
So let's talk about that very quickly. Congressmember, you, of course, have supported Tiffany Caban. She won her race for city council. For the first time, the majority of those who won in the primary are women. She said, quote, when talking about Eric Adams, even to look at who people voted for at every level of government. You look at districts like mine, where in Astoria houses overwhelmingly voters were Tiffany Caban and Eric Adams voters. Say what you want about Eric Adams, but for example, he's been somebody who's supported the crisis management system, expanding violence interruption systems. She's supported by the Democratic Socialists of America. But nationally, I mean, you have President Biden meeting with Eric Adams today as he speaks about crime with Attorney General Merrick Garland and others. It's taken by the Democrats as no to defund the police and yes to a heavy police presence. Do you think that's the wrong message to take?
I do. I do think that it's the wrong message to take. I do believe that very heavily and it's not just a matter of personal opinion, but we also see public polling showing that that is the wrong interpretation to take as well. Now, this is not to say that people should not be concerned with public safety. And what we do know is that people across the country are increasingly concerned about incidents of public safety. And this is mirrored by public health data that we see. There is an increase in crime and in incidents of violence as the country really reopens up from the pandemic, and the desperation created by a, frankly, very poor U.S. response to the pandemic in terms of the economic devastation. And so as things open up, we're starting to see more crime and incidents of violence. Now, that should absolutely be a point of concern, but the response to that should not necessarily be over-policing. And Americans know that. We have seen recent polling, I believe from ABC News, but I could be mistaken on the polling outlet, but margins from about 65 to 75% of those polled are showing that the way that we counter these increases in incidents is through economic opportunity and community investment in communities where these surges are happening. And we see that's not only where the polling is, but that's what the data shows, and that's what the evidence shows is the best way to support reductions in crime. It is with anti-violence programs, which is one of the reasons why I've requested community funding projects to help support anti-violence programs, which can help reduce incidents and reoccurrence of violence by more than 50%, which is more effective than almost any policing strategy that we know of. And so the message should not be that we should continue to over-police and over-surveil people in order to create reductions in crime and increase public safety. And I think at the point sure, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Representative. I wanted to ask you about the infrastructure and the developing agreement between Democrats and Republicans on infrastructure, the concerns of you and other members of the Progressive Caucus about what is going to happen to efforts to combat climate change in these battles over infrastructure.
Well, I believe that the Progressive Caucus is rather united in the fact that we will not support bipartisan legislation without a reconciliation bill and one that takes bold and large action on climate, drawing down carbon emissions, but also job creation and increasing equity and resilience for impacted communities, particularly frontline communities. And so we've made that very clear, and that a bipartisan agreement will not pass unless we have a reconciliation bill that also passes. And so that is where we've drawn a strong line. And I believe that Speaker Pelosi, the White House, and Majority Leader Chuck Schumer have taken that threat quite seriously. They know that we fully intend on acting out on that if a reconciliation bill does not come to the floor of the House. And you know, there's many different actions that we need in a climate bill for reconciliation, whether it's a civilian climate corps, whether it is increased infrastructure and investment in rail and mass transit, and whether it's also centering frontline Indigenous, Black and Brown and low-income communities that are polluted on and often experience the greatest brunt and will be experiencing the greatest brunt of climate change-related infrastructure failures.
So this issue of trying to get a massive Green New Deal proposed, I mean, Bernie Sanders, of course, head of the Budget Committee, said $3 trillion is simply not enough to deal with what must be dealt with in this country, also involves this filibuster. And there are many right now in the voting rights community, for example, and this all overlaps, who are saying just President Biden is simply not expending his political capital to get this dealt with, because he has a very limited amount of time, possibly, when the Democrats are in power in the Senate and he's the president and Democrats control the House, to get some of this groundbreaking legislation through. Tomorrow he'll be giving a voting rights speech in Philadelphia. What does he have to do? What are you saying behind the scenes? What is Schumer saying? What is your relationship like with Schumer? What are you demanding they do that they're failing to do right now?
Well, I do believe that there is a sense, particularly among members of Congress, that believe that the White House is leaving some of its leverage on the table in terms of really pushing on voting rights and the passage of H.R. 1, and particularly in its conversations with those in the Senate, whether it is Senator Manchin, Sinema, or frankly, there are others. It's not just Manchin and Sinema that have been hesitant on the filibuster, but I believe that there are other members of the Senate that are essentially hiding behind them in their hesitations as well. And, you know, the White House has been stepping up slightly in its in that campaign, and I think that's evidenced by their decision to make a speech tomorrow. But I do believe that all of these conversations are quite interlinked, and I believe that it should be coming up in every conversation and every negotiation, whether it is infrastructure, whether it is voting rights, and so on. That the White House needs to be making explicit, frankly, to members of Congress, the way that it is what they are doing, particularly within our own party, to make sure that this gets done. Because the last thing that we want to see is a lot of wonderful speeches and public-facing statements, but no actual passage of critical voting rights legislation. And I think that this is, it cannot be stated enough that the United States is in a very fragile and delicate precipice of democracy in our own right. And if we do not get H.R. 1 passed, if we do not pass it in this term, I think I and many other individuals, frankly, are quite fearful for the state and future of our democracy. It is that simple. We have state Republican parties that are setting up the infrastructure and, frankly, the practice to overturn the results of an election, and that includes a presidential election.
And speaking of presidential elections, former President Trump delivered the keynote address at the Conservative Political Action Conference known as CPAC in Dallas, Texas over the weekend. He captured over 70% of the 2024 GOP presidential nomination poll at CPAC. Should Democrats be concerned about his continued popularity?
I mean, I think the whole country should be concerned. I think that there are two minds of this. One is that I do believe that whether he intends to run or not, former President Trump will be indicating and will continue to essentially tease the possibility. So what that is to say is to not discount the ability and the popularity that he may have and the possibility of him running again. But it is also to say that he may not, but wants to continue his vice grip over the Republican Party. And so there are two distinct possibilities here. But I do believe that the Democratic Party should be worried. And that cuts straight to the voting rights provisions. And I do want to state that even Senator Manchin and some others have indicated that H.R. 4, the John Lewis voting rights, is what they would support instead. And I think while H.R. 4 is critical for passage, it does not solve this problem. And it is not a substitute for passing the For the People Act. One main and enormous provision is that H.R. 1, it is essentially retroactive in that it will overturn and it will supersede many of these anti-democracy laws that are being passed in states across the country. And the Voting Rights Act the John Lewis Voting Rights Act does not do that. It restores key provisions of the Civil Rights Act, but H.R. 1 is what will actually institute and reverse some of these very corrosive and very frightening, frankly, anti-democracy laws that are being passed in state governments across the country.
Congressmember, if the pandemic taught us anything, the horror of this last year, it is that we are all in this together. I mean, not only in this country, but all over the world. If one person is sick, we are all vulnerable, which means we all have to protect each other. According to the New York Times, at the end of March 30th, 86% of shots that have gone into the arms worldwide have been administered in high or upper middle income countries. Only 0.1% of doses have been administered in low income countries. In Haiti, for example, they haven't gotten a shot. They haven't gotten a vaccine at all. What has to be done in this country? Now the discussion today specifically is, should Americans get a third booster shot? And, of course, there are many areas of grave concern in the United States where less than a third of the population is vaccinated. But let's look at the rest of the world. What can the U.S. do, and you as a representative do, and Congress do?
Well, I think that there's a lot that we can do. And one thing that is extremely concerning is that if only the wealthy are being vaccinated, then the majority of the population in the world is not being vaccinated. And if that is the case, then we are not protecting ourselves from the virus, and we frankly are setting up the virus and COVID for being around for generations.
We have 20 seconds.
So I believe that we should be examining tools, whether it's the Defense Production Act or whether it is other modes of mechanism, that we look at this as a defense issue, and that we mobilize mass production of vaccines and export them across the world, and in additionally taking on the big pharma companies that are trying to profit off of mass vaccinations. They should be free and fully available to people around the world.
We want to thank you so much for being with us. We hope you'll come back soon. Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, thank you so much. I'm Amy Goodman, Juan Gonzalez.